On the morning of September 16, 2013, Washington, D.C., became the backdrop of a horrifying act of violence that left 12 innocent people dead and others injured. The Washington Navy Yard shooting was not the first mass shooting to grip the United States, but it stood out for the chilling circumstances surrounding the attacker. Aaron Alexis, a 34-year-old former Navy reservist turned contractor, carried out the massacre in a secure military facility, raising questions about mental health, gun laws, and the gaps in federal security systems. This true crime story delves deeply into the life of Aaron Alexis, examining the factors that led him to commit such an atrocity. Through the lens of his troubled upbringing, military career, descent into mental illness, and ultimate descent into violence, we explore how warning signs were missed, safeguards failed, and lives were lost. Aaron Alexis was born on May 9, 1979, in Queens, New York. Growing up in a middle-class family in Brooklyn, his life appeared typical. He was raised in a religious household and attended public schools, where he was described as a bright but introverted student. However, even during his formative years, Alexis exhibited signs of emotional volatility. His family and friends recall moments when his temper flared unexpectedly, but these incidents were often dismissed as youthful impulsiveness. In high school, Alexis developed a passion for computers and engineering, excelling in subjects that required analytical thinking. His interest in technology became a cornerstone of his identity, shaping his career aspirations. Yet beneath his quiet demeanor was a simmering frustration with the world around him. He often confided in close friends that he felt overlooked and misunderstood, sentiments that would later deepen into paranoia. After graduating high school, Alexis worked various low-paying jobs, struggling to find stability. His family encouraged him to pursue higher education or a career in the military, believing it would provide him with structure and purpose. In 2007, Alexis took their advice and enlisted in the Navy Reserves, a decision that marked the beginning of a tumultuous journey. Alexis's time in the Navy was marked by contradictions. On paper, he seemed like a capable service member with potential. He completed his training and was assigned to various posts, working in aviation logistics. However, his superiors soon noticed troubling patterns. Alexis frequently clashed with colleagues and struggled to adhere to the discipline required of military life. Between 2007 and 2011, Alexis was cited multiple times for misconduct. He was reprimanded for insubordination, unauthorized absences, and disorderly conduct. On one occasion, he reportedly exhibited fits of rage during a confrontation with a fellow sailor, an incident that raised concerns about his temperament. Despite these red flags, Alexis avoided severe disciplinary actions, as the Navy's policies at the time often emphasized rehabilitation over punishment. In 2011, Alexis's behavior reached a tipping point. After a series of infractions, he was recommended for discharge. However, instead of receiving a dishonorable or general discharge, Alexis was granted an honorable discharge under circumstances described as administrative separation. This decision allowed him to retain access to certain veteran benefits and avoid a tarnished record, a factor that would later play a role in his employment and access to firearms. After leaving the Navy, Alexis's life took a downward spiral. He relocated to Fort Worth, Texas, where he worked as a waiter and part-time consultant. During this period, he began to exhibit more pronounced signs of instability. His temper worsened, and he became increasingly isolated. Friends and acquaintances noticed a change in his demeanor, describing him as withdrawn and erratic. In 2010, Alexis had a disturbing encounter with law enforcement. He discharged a firearm into the ceiling of his apartment, claiming that his neighbors were being too loud, and he acted out of frustration. Although no one was injured, the incident highlighted his volatile nature and access to weapons. Alexis was arrested but ultimately avoided prosecution, as the charges were dropped when the case failed to gain traction. Financial instability compounded his problems. Alexis struggled to hold down a steady job, frequently bouncing between short-term gigs. Despite his expertise in technology, his erratic behavior often alienated potential employers. By 2013, he found work with a defense contractor, the Experts, which provided its support to the U.S. Navy. This position required a security clearance, which he retained despite his troubled past. The months leading up to the Washington Navy Yard shooting painted a grim picture of Aaron Alexis's mental state. By early 2013, he had begun experiencing auditory hallucinations, believing that he was being targeted by microwave machines and electronic harassment. These delusions were classic symptoms of psychosis, likely exacerbated by untreated mental illness. In August 2013, Alexis sought treatment at Veterans Affairs VA medical facilities, complaining of insomnia and severe anxiety. He was prescribed medication but received no comprehensive mental health evaluation. Despite voicing concerns about hearing voices and feeling paranoid, his claims were not thoroughly investigated. Friends and colleagues became increasingly alarmed by his behavior. He frequently spoke about feeling persecuted and expressed a deep mistrust of authority figures. His writings during this period revealed a fixation on conspiracy theories and a belief that he was the victim of a targeted government plot. These warning signs were glaring but ultimately ignored by those around him. On September 16, 2013, Aaron Alexis carried out one of the most chilling workplace shootings in U.S. history. That morning, he arrived at the Washington Navy Yard in southeast Washington, D.C., carrying a legally purchased Remington 870 shotgun. Despite his mental health issues, Alexis had been able to purchase the weapon in Virginia just days earlier, a fact that underscored the laxity of existing background check systems. Alexis entered Building 197, where he worked as an IT contractor, using his security clearance to bypass initial checkpoints. At approximately 8:16 a.m., he opened fire on unsuspecting employees, beginning a rampage that would last over an hour. His first victims were seated in a cafeteria, unaware of the impending danger. The attack triggered widespread panic. Employees barricaded themselves in offices, while others fled the building. Alexis moved methodically through the facility, targeting victims at random. At one point, he obtained a handgun from a security guard he had killed, further escalating the chaos. Law enforcement responded swiftly, but the layout of the Navy Yard made it difficult to locate the shooter. For over an hour, Alexis engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with police. Finally, at 9:25 a.m., he was cornered on the third floor of the building. In the ensuing exchange of gunfire, Alexis was fatally shot, bringing the massacre to an end. The Washington Navy Yard shooting left an indelible mark on the nation. 12 people lost their lives, their ages ranging from 46 to 73. These individuals were not soldiers or combatants, they were civilians and contractors who had come to work that day expecting routine tasks, not violence. Their deaths were a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the unexpected dangers that can arise even in secure environments. In the days following the attack, investigators worked tirelessly to understand Alexis's motives. His personal writings and online activity revealed a deeply disturbed individual consumed by paranoia and delusions. He believed he was being controlled by electromagnetic waves and saw the attack as a form of retaliation against his perceived tormentors. The tragedy also highlighted significant lapses in security protocols. Alexis's ability to retain his security clearance despite his criminal record and mental health issues drew sharp criticism. The Department of Defense launched an internal review, leading to reforms aimed at strengthening the vetting process for contractors. The Washington Navy Yard shooting reignited debates on multiple fronts, from mental health care to gun control. Alexis's untreated psychosis was a central factor in the tragedy, raising questions about the availability and accessibility of mental health services. Advocates called for increased funding for mental health programs, particularly for veterans, who often face unique challenges in adjusting to civilian life. The shooting also underscored the flaws in America's gun laws. Despite his history of violence and mental instability, Alexis was able to purchase a firearm legally. This loophole prompted renewed calls for universal background checks and red flag laws, which would allow authorities to intervene when individuals exhibit dangerous behavior. Finally, the attack emphasized the need for better workplace security, particularly in facilities handling sensitive or classified information. Measures such as enhanced screening processes, improved physical security, and active shooter training were implemented in the wake of the tragedy, aiming to prevent future incidents. The victims of the Washington Navy Yard shooting were more than statistics, they were fathers, mothers, siblings, and friends. Their lives were cut short in an act of senseless violence, leaving behind grieving families and communities. Memorials and vigils were held across the country, honoring their memories and celebrating their contributions to society. The shooting also left survivors grappling with trauma. Many employees who were present that day reported long-term psychological effects, including anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). Their stories serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of supporting those affected by violence. The immediate aftermath of the Washington Navy Yard shooting brought a wave of sorrow across the nation. News outlets broadcast harrowing images of the scene, terrified employees evacuating the building, law enforcement officers searching for the shooter, and the grief-stricken faces of the victims' families. The names of the 12 individuals who lost their lives were soon released, and each name carried with it a story of dreams, contributions, and love. Communities across the country held vigils to honor the victims. In Washington, D.C., the city united in mourning, with thousands gathering at the Navy Memorial to pay their respects. President Barack Obama addressed the nation, calling the attack a cowardly act, and expressing condolences to the victims' families. His words reflected the sentiments of a grieving nation struggling to make sense of the tragedy. Religious institutions, advocacy groups, and civic organizations joined in solidarity, offering support to the victims' families and survivors. Counseling services were made available to employees and first responders, who faced the emotional aftermath of witnessing such violence. While the nation mourned, the focus shifted to understanding how such a tragedy could occur within a high-security military facility. The Washington Navy Yard shooting exposed glaring vulnerabilities in federal security systems, prompting a wave of criticism and calls for reform. The fact that Alexis, despite his history of erratic behavior and prior arrests, retained a security clearance shocked many. Critics questioned how a person with such a troubled past could gain and maintain access to a facility as secure as the Navy Yard. One of the key issues was the process used to vet individuals for security clearances. At the time, background checks often relied on outdated systems that failed to capture important information, such as arrests that did not lead to convictions or incidents that were not fully documented. Alexis's 2010 arrest for firing a gun into his ceiling, for example, did not appear as a disqualifying factor during his clearance review. Additionally, the reliance on subcontractors to provide it and other support services was scrutinized. While contractors like Alexis underwent vetting processes, these checks were often less rigorous than those for full-time military personnel. The Navy and Department of Defense faced intense scrutiny, leading to promises of overhauling their security policies. Within months of the shooting, the federal government implemented several changes to address these gaps. Security clearance procedures were tightened, requiring more thorough background checks and periodic reevaluations for individuals working in sensitive environments. The reforms aimed to ensure that warning signs, such as mental health issues or criminal behavior, would not be overlooked in the future. Alexis's descent into violence was closely tied to his untreated mental health issues, a fact that underscored the broader mental health crisis in the United States. His delusions about being targeted by microwave machines and hearing voices were clear signs of psychosis, a condition often associated with disorders like schizophrenia or severe bipolar disorder. Despite seeking help from Veterans Affairs VA facilities, Alexis did not receive the comprehensive care he needed. The shooting prompted a national conversation about the state of mental health care, particularly for veterans. Advocates highlighted the gaps in the VA system, where overburdened facilities and limited resources often left veterans without adequate support. Alexis's case became a tragic example of what can happen when mental health symptoms are ignored or inadequately treated. In response to the tragedy, lawmakers and advocacy groups called for increased funding for mental health programs, better training for VA staff, and more accessible resources for veterans. Public awareness campaigns emphasize the importance of recognizing and addressing mental health issues before they escalate into crises. However, systemic change was slow, and the challenges of destigmatizing mental health and improving care persisted. The story of Alexis served as a grim reminder of the need for continued advocacy and reform in this critical area. The Washington Navy Yard shooting remains a stark reminder of the complexities and consequences of untreated mental illness, inadequate security systems, and gaps in gun control laws. The story of Aaron Alexis is one of missed opportunities to intervene, provide care, and prevent a tragedy that claimed 12 innocent lives. As a nation, the lessons from this tragedy compel us to reflect on how we can build a society that prioritizes mental health, ensures workplace safety, and balances individual rights with collective security. While the scars of that day will never fully heal, the resilience of survivors, the advocacy of victims' families, and the reforms implemented in its wake offer hope for a future where such tragedies are less likely to occur. By continuing to tell these stories, we honor the memories of those we have lost and reaffirm our commitment to a safer, more compassionate world.